Hello, everyone. Welcome to another great Lunch and Learn here at Improving. Today, our special guest, her name is Emily Stickle, and she will be presenting another great talk on Agile leadership, and it's starting with you. I don't know if you had a chance to attend our last Lunch and Learn, or our last Tech Friday, I'm sorry, last week, but it was a great topic, again, led by Emily, and so I think you're all in for a special treat today. If you have any questions, the Q&A on the upper right-hand side of your screen is open. Please post them in there, and we will be reading them off periodically. All right, go ahead, Emily. You can take it away.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that kind introduction. I'm really excited to be here. I promise it's a different talk than last Friday, so you guys don't have to keep hearing my same wonderful ideas, although I am very passionate about all of these topics. So yeah, today we're really going to be focusing, again, it's another agile leadership conversation. And while it's still personal, agility has to be embodied personally for it to be on an organizational level. I really also wanted to take a little bit of time to walk through enterprise organizational transformations, looking at it from a variety of perspectives. So first, let's get introductions out of the way. I have been doing Agile work now for a little over a decade, and I'm really proud and happy to be here at Improving, continuing on that journey. I actually am probably one of the few people in the world who came from a non-tech background, although I came to Agility through PMP. I'm a certified project manager. I went on to become a certified Agilist with PMI as well. And I'm a certified HR professional. So a lot of the work that I did from an Agile perspective was in the world of operations and as well as the world of changing human dynamics. So it's been a real pleasure to be able to continue to grow and see Agile supported by technology, as well as my experience with Agile on a very personal and people-based level. So yeah, in case anyone's got any questions, some great intermingling of talents. So first, just kind of going over what we hope to accomplish today. I really want to take a little bit of time to define what we mean by an agile transformation. And so you'll hear agile shift, agile transformation, becoming a more agile organization. There's a lot of different ways of saying it, but ultimately, a lot of organizations right now are looking at expanding agility, not just from a team level or department level, but really to take our large kind of clunky setups and systems and move them into a space where they can be agile. It's the future of how we're building business. I also want to take a little bit of time to discuss what building looks like. So when people ask, okay, well, that's what I want, it sounds great. How do you get there? There's a lot of different considerations that should go into this. And there's a lot of planning and a lot of understanding organizations at a multitude of levels. And so we're going to go over some of the items that you would think about as you build a plan. And then just briefly touch on kind of what are some of the rewards. We're going to go through, if you're going to go through a big shift that's going to be uncomfortable, why are you doing it? What are some of the things that you can expect? So again, we mentioned this is personal agility. Really, organizations want to become more agile. And I keep saying it that way. And really, what should be said is organizations want to create the processes, systems, environment, and safety around allowing individuals to live an agile mindset. It's not enough to just use the practices, the terminology, the technology. You really have to instill those values across an organization to allow individuals to lean into that. And so when I work with organizations that are ready to start their transformation, it's really about kind of how do you build a mindset around it? How do you ensure that people feel valued, and how can you leverage that all around? So although I will be spending a lot of time talking about, hey, at an organizational level, all your organizations are made up of people and how they interact with your system. So keep in mind that this can be applied at a multitude of levels and different areas. So just kind of taking a quick pause before we get started. Any questions come through? Anything need a little bit more clarification before we dive right in?
No, no questions on my side. Everything's looking great.
Perfect. All right. So before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about why enterprise agility is so important. And again, a lot of people in technology are probably a little bit more familiar with what that looks like at a department level. Most technology teams, especially product-based teams, are going to have agile practices within their day-to-day operations anyway. Um, at an enterprise level, though, there's a lot of discussions. According to a 2020 survey by Deloitte, over 90% of executives had considered Agile as either important or very important. So, at a very high level, it's understanding that the way we do business is shifting. That only further was compounded with COVID and our dramatic shift to work from home, where we had to rely on changing our processing, trusting our people, building out our technology. All of these things intersect with Agile mindsets, and we were forced to start thinking about them in a very dramatic way. So a lot of companies now have done some of the more uncomfortable work, but they're still kind of playing around with what that looks like. And that goes over to, according to Gartner, only about 31% of organizations have adopted Agile widely. Now, again, when we talk about wide adoption, we're talking about multiple departments and a coordinated business level effort. We do see higher adoption rates in some departments. I pick on technology a lot, but another area of another enabling department that I see this a lot in is in human resources. Having to work with people and having that structure, you really have to start putting in small dynamic frameworks. You have to be able to test and you have to practice. You can't work as a monolith. So again, you'll see some of these departments have adopted it, but yeah, only about 31%. And then even more scary is only 9% of managers believe that they're a major part of a transformation. We're going to talk why that's a little bit problematic. Again, everybody should be agile, but managers are going to be one of the biggest groups to set the tone of what an agile organization will look like. And so you really need to see adoption at a multitude of levels. Even if their work doesn't look like what a Scrum team would look like, you really have to have buy-in at every major level of the organization to have a successful organizational enterprise level agility. So clearly it's the way of the future, but how we get there is a little bit foggy. And I think that's really important when you talk about those, is the importance of a coach and somebody to help you through it. Well, I am going to kick off on defining agility by telling you guys about somebody I had a conversation with recently. They're an exec at a large multinational organization and had come from an enabling department outside of IT. This person was telling me that they had this really solid structure of succession planning. They built teams around projects so that they could complete it really independently. There was management support, but not oversight. And they were able to consistently, dynamically change teams, whether it was for delivery or upscaling. It was a delivery model that worked incredibly well for them. And similar to what you would see in a lot of agile organizations. Well, fast forward a few years, now the same executive is telling me how much he hates agile. He hates it. The organization decided that they wanted to do a major agile shift and started moving him and others away from that really departmental level of agility that he found and put it at a very wide scale. There were a few things that didn't go well. First and foremost, there's communication changed dramatically. The support changed dramatically. And by the time I talked to him, he said he hates it. He hates everything about it. His exact words were, Agile doesn't believe in reports and they want us to be a startup. This is I think a $130 billion company. It's massive. Startup methodology isn't going to work for that. And I think a lot of coaches get kind of hung up in it. When you're working at team level, you need to be dynamic and you need to be structured, and working software over reporting, that's really important. When you're talking about a massive enterprise level, though, you want that flexibility to be structured. And so in talking to him and really trying to take home like what he was saying, he kept saying things like, they think that I can take the guide and that's going to be good enough. That's not good enough. We're too big. It's not going to work. Or they tell me that these meetings and these processes are supposed to fill gaps. Well, I don't have anything to show. Now we've got all of these managers running around trying to do Agile. There's no structure, there's no support, and he hates it. So when I start off working with organizations, I do like to set the standard of, agility is not just a process. It's not a process shift. This isn't an upgrade. It's a continuous improvement event, but we're still kind of working out, building that environment of agility and not just putting in agile processes. Also, the documentation around it is really short. You can't learn Agile in just a handful of pages, even though that's generally all we have. It's really going to be a personal transition, both for the individual and the organization, and you're going to have to invest more time than the documentation out there. It's also not a set of tools or meetings that's really easy to lean into because it's accessible and people, it's familiar to them, but that's not what it is either. And so he fell into the trap that the coaches who came in tried to force in a tool set rather than a mindset. And that left him feeling vulnerable without support. You're replacing one set of unworkable bureaucratic principles with what is ultimately going to become another group of unmanageable bureaucratic principles, just with a different name. So looking at that, I started trying to have those conversations of, what would have looked good. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. I think most people are familiar with it, but of course, agility is going to be a constantly improving process. And that's where, again, they got kind of lost. You can't just create agility. What you saw before with dynamic teams allowed them to continue, adjust, and deliver and try things out. Moving into a monolith change, that wasn't giving them support. And instead, you really have to start not with this iterative framework, but the mindset change where you can go through at a high level organizational group and let managers at a variety of places say, these are the types of skills and thought processes that I want my teams to have. We want to be able to deliver quickly. We want frequent communications. Agile is not getting rid of all of your paperwork, and you're still going to have to provide reports. However, it will give you the framework where you're not filling out a TPS report. You can get the information that people need by identifying that information and working with them. Self-managing teams are a big thing. And so there's a lot of times that you'll have the mindset of self-managing teams means no managers. Well, in a lot of cases, no managers mean no support. You have to find the balance where people are going to get support with management. And a stronger conversation around self-managing teams isn't getting rid of managers, but upskilling managers and coaching them into how do you let them become enablers and supporters? How do you let them help drive the strategy and help people remove blockers rather than just manage the individual items? Your experts are going to know what to do, but sometimes they need a little bit more support. That's where self-managing comes in versus no managing. Creating dynamic processes. I always get nervous with this one, especially around the startup idea that he was mentioning. A lot of times people equate startups with no processes. You've got a bunch of people doing, and there's great work being done. And on a smaller scale, you probably don't need heavy processes. But when you're large, you're going to need to put some formality in place. And so instead of saying no processes, work towards creating dynamic processes, ones where you understand your goal and you build around that, understand what you're trying to accomplish, who's going to help you, and continually identifying and addressing it. One of the areas that a lot of these large organizations get stuck with is they'll put a process in place and then it just lives there forever. An agile organization should be regularly checking in those areas and taking feedback from teams at all levels to help build. And then all of this is going to go back to alignment on business goals. Again, it's hard because when you go through a transition like this, a lot of those business goals are going to come from the top. Again, an agile organization doesn't necessarily mean that it's driven from the top down. What it means is that top level managers are engaged in the success of an agile transformation. They're putting a framework in place to allow individuals to be safe and successful, and they're helping set the alignment of the goals. So that all feeds into how are you going to build a plan? So building a plan to get to agility is one of the most important things. We want to be agile, That's not going to get us there though. And so a lot of places want to jump right in and start doing the work that they have there. Got to take a step back. It's going to be time to reflect and build. And a lot of the groups that I work with, I will spend time with them. It might be years of planning on how to go into agility. And that seems really counterintuitive when you're like, but agility is fast delivery. You need to set a foundation, and a strong one at that, because the majority of organizations who start agile transformations ultimately end up abandoning it or only putting in parts in place. A widespread, adoptable, and meaningful plan created upfront and signed on by leaders at all levels and basically every individual at the organization is what's going to get you to a successful organizational implementation. So before we jump into a plan, any questions on kind of what we're talking about at organizational agility or things to consider before we get started with planning?
I haven't seen any come in yet. I think this is really insightful, though. Again, if you do have any questions, please post them, and I'll be sure to read them.
Yeah, it'll be fun because we'll see if we can stump it. I have a lot of real world experience, so I'm always happy to pull on that and talk to it, but I'm always learning. So I'm kind of interesting to see the thoughts. Like I said, especially most of the companies I worked for have not been tech companies. So every organization has IT. They are an enabler. They're going to be an immensely important part of any of this work. But a lot of the companies that hasn't been their major mission. So there's going to be a unique perspective that I'm sure a lot of people on this call are going to have that even I haven't had the opportunity to explore fully yet. So let's jump right in. Before we can build our specific plan, we're even going to take a one step back and start to say, how can we assess where we are at? So I talked to a lot of organizations about assessing organizational maturity. Now, there's actually an organizational maturity lifecycle model, which is introduction, I think it's introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. And a lot of people in business school have seen that. I'm not going to talk about that model today. That's not what we care about. That's the overall life cycle that you would see at an organization. I'm talking about those short snippets where we can ultimately start to impact and change what we want to do. And so one of the things that I ask the groups of people that I work with is to start to consider your growth perfect cycle that you're going to see. You're going to see this on an individual level, team level, you're going to see this department, and probably even at an organizational level. And it's important to start carving those out and identifying it. And the reason I say this is so important is that a lot of people get stuck trying to implement changes because they're implementing it at the wrong time. The team, the person, or whatever level isn't ready to receive that information. And it's definitely, there's going to be nuances around it, but really and truly, I talk with a lot of groups to say, we're not ready for new policies until teams get into that growth mindset. And that growth mindset is excellent for new policies. That's when trainings can roll out. That's when we can try new things, process changes. You're going to know that your team is really in there when they're receptive to the information, they're experimenting with it, they're trying out new things, there's questions coming. As you continue to go in this cycle, though, you'll start to notice things like change fatigue or a lack of adoption. That doesn't mean that you can't change, and that doesn't even mean that the information that you're getting to the teams isn't valuable. What it means is that they're starting to move into a perfect phase. They've got the amount of information that they want to have, and they're going to want to start trying out new things, experimenting it, applying it to their own space, putting their own lens on it. And it's really important to make the time and space for them to do it. As much as we'd like to be agile up front, the early adoption is going to take some time, and you need to make the space to let these teams work within this cycle of growth perfect. As teams start to come out of the perfect cycle, you'll notice things like discontent, boredom, a lack of following the rules, things like that, pushback. And that's when the team is starting to move again into a model ready to receive new information. And I want to bring that up early on because I'm going to reference this in a couple different places, but it's not something that a lot of people, especially even Agile practitioners, look for when they work for teams. Again, I have an HR background as well, and so we spend a lot of time making sure that we try to marry HR practices with any sort of agility or enterprise level changes. So that's something to consider, and that's something that everyone should really take home to their teams as well. It's not just part of an enterprise change. Start watching how your teams work, or maybe managers or team members or other people that you interact with. You'll start to notice people go through this cycle, and there's nothing wrong with it. But if you adjust when you try to push changes or when you make space for learning, you'll find that people are going to be more receptive to the information you're trying to provide. In addition to understanding the growth perfect cycle of where you're at with any of the groups you work for, you'll also want to try to look for the Agile maturity levels. A lot of Agile practitioners are familiar with this, but a lot of people who are part of the Agile process may have not had a chance to see it. And it's important to take the time to understand where you are as an organization or team, where you are in this organizational maturity model. Again, you're going to have to tailor your approach to what teams are able to do. You're going to want to push them up into new agility levels, but you can't come out the gate with information for a highly mature agile team and expect it to be widely adopted if they're still at a really low starting level. The initial phase is, we're still trying to find our goals. We're still trying to build some consistency. Generally, organizations at this phase are interested in becoming more agile. There's a want for it. They know that they need some team alignment. There's probably some outdated processes, not necessarily the tech debt in the way we think about it, but just kind of the operational tech debt in an operational sense, where you've got those outdated items that are hard to identify without looking at it through a new scale. And so your organizations like this, they're interested, but they're not ready. The next level is starting. And so you can start to see there's communication goals, which is, we're going to talk about communication on its own very specific slide because it gets left out and it's an important step. But communications and goals are starting to get put together. Goals and measurements are a little bit more defined. Generally, I still see organizations trying to find their footing at this level. And so they might have some goals. Maybe they're great, maybe they're still workable, but you start to see a little bit more formality. Teams and processes, though, at this lower level generally aren't ready. I see a lot of this when I work with groups and they're like a Scrum group. Well, we've got Scrum in place and they do the events every single day. That's great. But if you're at a lower maturity level or you're just starting off, generally they're doing just that, doing the events. The benefits that they would get from that, or the real growth and delivery that you hope to see, is probably not there. Doesn't mean that it's bad, but it just means that when you see things like that, step back and understand that the maturity level of what you're working with. 3 is defined. And so a lot of organizations, when they're at this level, are a little bit more ready to start off their overall agile transformation. There's trust and transparency and structure, and those are really important things. We want to do a mindset shift. We want to shift the way we do work, but we can't do that if everything is unknown. And so understanding and having that formality in place so that you can start to change it with clear communication, with guidance, is really an important place to be. Level 4 is measured, and that's where we're going to actually start to be able to say, we know where our goals are, we know where we want to go, and we can track on it. A lot of people think measured and metrics kind of coexist, and there's a lot of intermingling, but really and truly, we want to see this is more of a roadmap stage. If we have an idea of where we want to go, we can start tracking at a very diligent and proactive way to make sure that we're aligning with that. And then optimization. I'm not going to lie, I have not seen an organization at an optimization level. I'm sure that there will be one day, but that's where you really see kind of a full matrix organization. You've got teams that can easily pivot and adjust. Processes are updated on a regular basis. People have a really clear vision for where they need to go and the part that they play in that, and they're really able to dynamically shift. A lot of organizations, again, with COVID and work from home, they had a really hard time with the shift because they were probably at a lower maturity level. And so all of a sudden, we've got to build in a brand new structure with brand new technology and a new level of trust for our employees. It was a stretch moment. But on the other side of this, a lot of organizations that typically would have been at a much lower level of agility are actually going to be set up at a much higher level to start looking at it. Again, as far as like, where does the future of Agile go? Business operations right now having to change the way they think of things. Business operations is going to be going through this practice more and more and more. And so it's only beneficial for us in technology to consider those conversations and think about how we can support operations as they go through agility. Another thing that I want to talk about is our organizational enablers. This is a really important mindset when we think about how we want to start building out our agile transformation. Somebody once told me every technology or every company is now a technology company, and I understand the sentiment, but I happen to disagree. Technology is at the basis of how we work. That's how this presentation is happening. That's how we communicate with each other. You know, digital natives are the younger generation who never had an opportunity to not have technology. I still remember having to have quarters for payphones, and I can proudly say that the iPad didn't come out until after I graduated from college. I'm so young though, so that's just proof that the iPad is a relatively new piece of technology. Regardless though, we can't operate in a world that isn't supported by technology. And so your IT department no longer is just the help desk support or the computer that you've got on your desk. It is your method of communication, your support, your data housing, often your first line of defense for security. They are strategic partners in business operations, and oftentimes will be the foundation for the business that occurs there. Every HR department generally has an HCM now, and every finance department has some sort of an ERP. So technology has to be an active part of your agile transition. Again, not just at a technology and IT space, but how they permeate and interact with every area of technology or of your operations. Again, technology companies, we tend to see more agile events. So they're also an important supporter because you'll often find your champions in IT. Those two departments that are running higher levels of agility can help create and support your operational agility. Next is people. And again, my background is in HR, and I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but a lot of the surveyed organizations out there who have departments that have moved to an agile space, HR generally comes up right behind IT. So again, very important thought process. As you go through and you start planning your agile shift, your operations, your people operations are going to be critical in working through that. And again, it's not your traditional HR. It's not it's not just the newsletters or whatever it used to be thought of. Again, these are strategic partners who often have an understanding of where your people are, thresholds, what succession planning looks like. HR is also a really diverse department. And I mentioned earlier that communications is going to be key in this. Technology is often going to be the platform you use to spread those communications, but your people, that department is really where you're going to find probably your biggest supporters. Generally, HR houses communications, training, and the other areas of the other support areas needed to really move that transition forward. Processes are another thing. When organizations get ready for a shift, that's time to talk through and have a really honest conversation with when was the last time any of your processes were reviewed? And so, again, a lot of organizations threw something out there and it's been the process forever because that's just what it was. As you get ready to shift, one of your enablers, funny enough, is your processes. And so taking a strong look at how they interact, who owns them, where they go, what the goals are they even safe? Do they make sense? It's time to go through and take an honest assessment of basically all of your processes in existence and start to really lean them out, find out ways to eliminate them, change them around, but again, not get rid of all processes ever. You want them to be meaningful and you want people to be able to leverage those as enablers, not find them to be cumbersome and difficult to work with. Structure is another area that, again, it's an enabler. And so we talked about self-managing teams, teams that pivot, things like that. You're going to have that really difficult conversation where your structures are going to change. The role of manager doesn't go away, but how people get managed, that's going to change a lot. And one of the things that I've worked with a lot of organizations with is what's going to happen when people are not happy with that. What happens with attrition? And so my job as an HR professional oftentimes is when organizations got ready to really push forward with these are having those honest but difficult conversations of what is our threshold for people leaving. There are a lot of resources in the space of the world on how to stress test your employee base, how to get feedback. You can use buzz sessions to get feedback from organizations. I spent a lot of time working with kind of quick and dirty succession planning. How do you identify your high-performing employees? How can we start pivoting them into areas where we can rotate them in if we do have high levels of attrition? Developing plans for how can we get down to minimum operations, keep the lights on if we have a large walkout so that we can go ahead and scale up. We always try to really work to keep people at companies. There is a lot that you can do to keep people happy and supported through a transition, but anytime you go through this, your structures are going to change, and part of that is because people leave. And it's hard to think about that. However, if done right, it is one of the greatest opportunities to set yourself up for success. You have the opportunity to build from the ground up. What are your teams to really make you an agile organization and keep you that way? And then, of course, it's strategy. All of these roll up into the overall strategy, knowing your enablers, knowing your maturity level, understanding how to interact with your groups. Every strategy is going to be really unique to that organization, and there's no secret or template to use for strategy. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations are sold that can happen and their agile transformation stalls out. Strategy is going to come from the difficult work of reflecting on what needs to change and what you want to see, and the difficult decisions that come from looking at your enablers. It's also a great point of excitement. Your strategy is going to be where you want to be, what you envision this transformation looking like, and what kind of a space you want to build for your employees. Again, Agile is supposed to be that element that makes your employees excited and supports them and allows them to be able to practice Agile events in a safe space. That strategy is going to let you set the tone for that. So the agility application process, honestly, this should be a circle. I did it as a line though, because you do have to start somewhere. Again, we are growing to be an agile organization. We can't necessarily use agile practices right out the gate. You got to set the foundation. And so after going through and understanding kind of that team cycle, understanding your organizational maturity levels, defining your enablers and who you have, you're going to go through a set of steps to really get there. One of them is defining goals. Again, an agile transformation is not the objective to be agile. A goal that's going to come that's going to help you be an agile organization is going to be wide. It's going to be a battle cry. It's going to be something that every single person at that organization is going to say, yes, I want to do that. Now, those goals are going to trickle down. You're going to have strategic goals and tactical goals. You're going to have specialists. You're going to know how to support those goals. It's going to look very different across the organization. But ultimately, every single person there can look up to that single goal and say, I am working towards that. And that is really important when you get your agile transformation started. My friend who's an executive at that organization, that's one of the biggest losses that they had. They said, change the way you do work, but they didn't say why. And without that, it can really feel that sense of being uncomfortable in an agile transformation. You don't have a reason to be uncomfortable and kind of a light at the end of the tunnel to know where to go. It just is putting you in an awkward spot, and that can make the organization not feel like a safe space, and it can make it difficult to operate. Now, one of the goals when goal setting is probably, I don't want to say it's an area that people struggle with, but oftentimes you'll start to see those goals, especially at the high level, be way too tactical. One of my favorite examples of good goal setting came from NASA. A few years ago, they decided to pivot and change, and it was boots on the moon, I think in 2022. That's a good organizational level goal. Now, boots on the moon in 2022, that doesn't mean they have an HR business professional over there trying to put somebody on the moon. What that means is you've started to break that out. Who's going to build the boots? Who's going to build the plane? Who's going to make sure that the people who build the boots and the plane know what support mechanisms they have? How can you start to build around that? But they had a unifying battle cry. Every single person at NASA could say, I'm doing this because all together, we're going to do that. And so when organizations start to really look towards moving to agility, find that unifying goal that can be built out. Next should be starting to apply principles. And this is an important place where a lot of agile coaches will start to come in. This is where you start to learn some of the terminology. You start to get comfortable with what an agile organization will look like ultimately. Start to get comfortable with some of the practices. It's going to look different. I mean, a lot of every agile coach is a little bit different. Every organizational need is a little bit different. Departments that have been exposed to this type of terminology will accept it at a different level than maybe some of the other spaces. And there's a lot of commingling. Agile and Scrum came out of technology. Lean manufacturing, Lean Six Sigma is an area that came from the manufacturing sector. There's a lot of surveying and communication that, although those ideas are in the Agile Manifesto, they come directly from the work of HR practitioners and their testing. So it's important to understand that there's a real intersectionality in this, but it's time to get everybody at every single level on board and comfortable with those new processes, those new practices. Again, upper management is going to help set the tone for an organization willing and able to accept agility, but individuals are really going to have to embody that. And they're going to have to start working towards what I want to see as agility, what that looks like. Is that within events, or am I not ready for that? Am I just trying to build trust and transparency across teams? Are managers having those conversations about servant leadership, or do we still need some additional coaching? This is where you're going to start building out your plan around those more specific levels. Practice and predict. We're going to start moving through the process. And so this is where teams are going to start getting better at what they do. We'd like to see that. So you're going to really start going through understanding, this is common knowledge now. So where are we going to go next? What's going to happen? Where can we push? Where can we improve? You're going to start identifying that, and you're going to see your organization's probably going to be a little bit more innovative. Likely, you'll see people who will start looking back at those enablers that we talked about earlier and say, hey, I think we can make some changes. I think that we can try these things out. And that goes right into refine the process. Now that people are comfortable, now that it's a predictable environment, we've set the standards for safety, people can start to experiment. These are self-managing teams. These are teams that we want to see really expand on what they're doing. And if they have a unifying goal and everybody's working towards that goal, they're going to get to really try out some new ways of supporting and impacting that goal. So they're going to refine their processes. They're going to try out new things. This is also a good time to start scaling up teams. If you started from a team level transition, there's a lot to play around with that. And then continue to iterate. Like I said, this should be a cycle, but you do have to start at the front, because when you continue to iterate, you don't want to go back a step or two. Applying principles, maybe you can do that, but really and truly, I want people to think about this as the example of when your goals change dramatically, that's when it's time to go back and kind of review the process again. A good example of this is a lot of our oil and gas technology companies in Houston. Oil and gas had some firm goals and some thought processes and some ways of doing things that as they start to pivot to green energy, they're going to have to go back and redefine those battle cries. That redefinition of goals is going to change how they apply agility across the organization. And so they're going to have to constantly iterate. But again, while it's cyclical in nature, you do want to go ahead and build your plan based off of those goals. Understand at every step where people are, how to do that, and then really push for this. Now, I did want to take a quick second to really hammer home communications. Again, as an HR professional, I tend to shout this from the rooftops. A lot of organizations are already doing it, but unfortunately, I see a lot also assume that as long as their teams are running okay, people know what's happening. I talk to a lot of managers and upper management who say, yeah, we have that clear goal. We're good. You're not going to build transparency or trust with that. And so unfortunately, consistent, regular communication to the correct audiences are going to be key to continuing on with your transition. Describe the change. That's an important one. And that should be a conversation. So once your goals are set, you're going to start building off of more goals. You have to keep saying them. A town hall once a year generally isn't enough to keep your organization aligned. I like to see a lot of the regular communication around where the goals are, highlighting people's success, highlighting where individuals have fit in. I like to see that people are having those opportunities to continue updates. Your goals are probably going to change a little bit as you continue to iterate. And although you're going to have your singular battle cry, those tactical goals might change. Make sure everyone knows about them. Make sure that everybody involved is involved in the thought process behind what you're doing. I like to see kind of regular check-ins in town halls. Leadership's coming to those strategy meetings and having those conversations is going to be immensely important. And again, it's going to be work. It's the work, though, that sets that foundation for trust and transparency. And so it's so important to continue to find those goals. Identifying the teams. Generally, when you're going through a large shift like this, you're going to have your champion teams, you're going to have your implementer teams, you're going to have people involved at a lot of different levels. Make sure they're identified. You don't have secret agents. Communicate who they are. Let them communicate with you. Ask them questions. Part of setting the stage for this transformation is making sure that communication is happening at a variety of levels. Let those teams own communication and help them continue that to come. Define the mindset. Again, we're not doing an agile transformation to be agile. We're doing it to create a culture around agility and allow those practices to permeate. And so that's going to look a little different. I've worked for contingent staffing, I've worked for oil and gas, I've worked for healthcare, and every time that mindset's a little different. There's going to be compliance concerns, and there's going to be some leadership transitions that are considered agile to that organization that maybe in technology we wouldn't. It doesn't matter. Define what the mindset is for that organization and then make that clear. Trust and transparency shouldn't change, but how that trust and transparency is facilitated across the organization may adjust some. And then finally create those quick wins and then communicate them. This is an uncomfortable time for an organization, and we're asking people to do uncomfortable things. If you can continue to celebrate those wins at large levels, small levels, wherever it is, allow those teams to help escalate it up, you're going to have more people really sign on to it. If experimenting, failing is still considered a quick win because that was the mindset we set, then let's make that clear. That's how people are really going to be able to continue to engage throughout this transition. So all of that is leading to, what are the outcomes? If 90% of executives think that Agile is important, what are they hoping to get out of this? An Agile transformation is several years long, and you're going to lose people. So you really want to think, what are some of those outcomes? And I'm powering through here. Sorry about that. So outcome. Oh, yes.
We do have one question. Would you like me to hold off a little bit, though?
No, let's go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, sure. So we have a question coming in. How do I confidently promote exploring Agile and its principles amongst extended teams, including management, and also where most IT functions are outsourced?
That's an excellent question, and it's hard, and it's something that a lot of organizations are experimenting with. I'm going to kind of pop back over here. So again, I go back to communication is key, and that is something in the early stages of trying to get adoption. I think clear communication on needs and wants and what you have is a good starting point. So it's hard. Like I said, 9% of upper management believes they're needed to be engaged in an Agile organization. I'm sure a lot of people are at a team level working with different ones saying, I know they want it, I know it's important, I know we can do it, but I got one of the 91% of the organizations where we don't have that coming from an upper management space. You have to assess where you are. It's not the best answer. You start the assessment of where you are, where your offshore teams are in maturity, where people are in who your enablers are in trying to get that moving. And then you start to you can develop a small plan around it. One of the things that we try really hard to with offshore teams is that we tend to have a very transactional nature in working with them. It's especially difficult when there's a lot of time differences. One of the things that I like to really focus on early on with my offshore teams is trying to create those quick wins. You can really start to celebrate, really start to explore. And one of the biggest things is to celebrate your failures. I mean, honestly, it's uncomfortable to say that, but we live in a society where our production and our ability to deliver is oftentimes the metric used to determine our success. In a culture of agility, it's that ability to experiment. And so celebrate those quick wins, celebrate those experimental wins, define the kind of mindset that you want to be around. Maybe you're not an upper level executive, but if you're working around teams, you can help determine what the mindset of those teams should be, how you want those interactions to look, where you can help set those expectations. So taking from some of these items and applying them in kind of toggled ways is a good starting point to start to have that. And then, of course, I would encourage you to talk with an Agile coach. One of the things that we do is have a perspective generally outside of the team mindset and methodology that can help add some information that you might not otherwise have. On an individual team level, it's hard to fully reflect on what some of your barriers may be, and to have that extra set of eyes really help reflect on that is a good place to start. So I don't know if that answers the question. I wish it was an easy answer. It could be like right here, this is the answer. But it's not. It's some tough work. It's worth it though. That's the thing. It's definitely worth it to do the tough work.
Thank you. I think that was very insightful.
Wonderful. All right. So I'm going to hop over. Last thing is outcomes. And it's funny that I have this slide here because ultimately the best outcomes that an organization should hope to have as part of their Agile transformation should be built on their goals. As you go through and as you do that, you're going to find your measurements Your tactical goals, we're really going to be able to have some strong refinement. But it's hard to sell an agile transformation on an idea. Yeah, hey, we'll be able to meet these goals that we don't have set. So there's some pretty standard metrics around what a lot of organizations start to see as they adopt agile processes. One is customer reaction, that quick delivery, the ability to innovate, all of those items are going to go to customer reactions. We have an improver here who says that, an agile practitioner, agile should delight the customer. And I really like the way that we say that because it is true. When you start to adopt these models, we're adopting them towards the end goal of our customer. That might be a business, that might be individuals within our organization, that might be anybody who's going to be the end receiver of our change. But we want to be able to give them directly what they need. And through agility, it's better for us to do that, especially when that changes frequently. People outcomes are another one. And this is so important to me as an HR practitioner, is when you have these large, siloed, clunky companies, you don't have the same level of retention or engagement as you do. A lot of times organizations getting ready to do different agile transformations will start to do something like an OHI survey, which is an organizational health survey. I don't know what the I stands for, but these are really targeted, generally third-party organizations who come in and at a wide scale survey employees to understand retention concerns, areas of attrition. We start to see what people feel like in different areas, levels of management. You can even get into some of these that'll track who your influencers are, who your detractors are in certain areas, if the overall organizational goals are clear. And a pre and post survey from your agility transformation is often eye-opening. Agility is going to start letting employees be a part of the conversation. If you know the goal of the company and you know what you're good at, you get to start on a very personal and intimate level giving to your organization. So it's less prescriptive and more proactive. And you're going to see that through agility transformation. Business performance is another one. Like I said, it's not necessarily the tech debt, but the operation debt. You're going to have a lot of things that are just out in the space of your organization that have been there because they are there. When you're in agility, you're constantly having to change. That is the only way that you're able to continue to align your organization, make those changes, and continue on. So your business performance is likely to increase. And let's be honest, there's financial gains. Agility allows organizations often to work a little bit more lean. If you don't have high levels of attrition, you're going to be able to see those financial gains. There's just a lot that'll come of it. Technology is going to also play a role in those financial gains. So again, those metrics and those outcomes should be deeply personal. But if you're selling organizational agility, you'll find that generally the goals and the outcomes of that transition will probably fall into one of these 4 buckets, specific to the organization, but pretty identifiable. So finally, after almost an hour of hearing me talk, we're wrapping up. And one of the things that, again, I want to highlight is we're talking about this at an enterprise level. This is going to become more and more prominent with organizations. We're going to see this happen. But a lot of these ideas and methodologies can be applied to departments, to teams, and even to people on a personal level. Part of the importance of an agile transformation is really creating that agile environment. And all of that is a waste if individuals aren't willing to do the heavy lifting themselves personally of reflecting on their own agility. So make sure that this isn't a one-way street. As organizations grow and change and go through those stretch and uncomfortable periods, you will too. And it's also your job to speak up. The friend of mine who's an executive, that's one of the things that they're trying to find is how can he coach up? And, having those discussions of if our expectation is an agile organization, then one of the first steps should be getting that feedback from people. So that's where we're at. And that's something to consider anytime you work with enterprise agility or even just agility on your own teams. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Emily. I haven't seen any more questions come in on our side. I think that was really an amazing talk, very insightful, and I'm always excited to see your name pop up on our list of presenters.
Wonderful.
So, yeah. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Not right now. Clearly it's something I'm passionate about. Feel free to reach out to me directly if anyone ever wants to discuss this. And, one of the beautiful things about agility and agile coaching is that every coach brings a really unique perspective. Mine happens to be from operations. And honestly, I did case management for 10 years. So a lot of the way I approach coaching comes from a different perspective in a different space. So you're going to see a lot of this stuff in agility applied elsewhere. You're going to see a lot of practitioners also use some of these same tools, and they're going to come to a slightly different conclusion. All of that is really wonderful. And so I would encourage people, if you're interested in organizational agility and you need help from a perspective of an HR professional, that's great. We're out there. And maybe technology people are going to be way more suited, but it's important to find the right coach and really just be patient. It's uncomfortable. You're unpacking a lot from where you had been, but it's worth it.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, I hope everyone on the call enjoyed our virtual lunch and learn. I encourage you to come and join us next week. We try to hold one every single Friday. And feel free to check out Improving. We're a great company. We're on LinkedIn, and keep an eye out for our name. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great weekend.
You too.